Can you imagine the world champion having to retire his car mid-race, not because of an accident, but simply because he loses power? That's exactly what just happened to Max Verstappen at the Chinese Grand Prix. But the most worrying thing isn't the retirement itself. What's truly unsettling is what it reveals about the current state of Red Bull. Before we continue, I want to know your opinion. Do you think Red Bull is entering a real crisis this season? Because the big question right now is this: are we just seeing a one-off problem, or the beginning of something much more serious within the team? Stay until the end, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. In this analysis, we're going to break down what really happened with Max Verstappen's retirement in China, what went wrong with the RB22, and why this weekend has set off alarm bells at Red Bull. Because it wasn't just a mechanical issue. It was a whole weekend full of worrying signs. To truly understand what happened with Max Verstappen at the Chinese Grand Prix, we first need to look at the full picture of the weekend, because his retirement on Sunday wasn't an isolated incident. From Friday onwards, there were already worrying signs within the Red Bull garage. Verstappen began to show clear discomfort with the RB22's handling, describing the car as extremely difficult to drive and with a balance that constantly shifted from one corner to the next. For a driver who for years has been able to dominate races even when the car wasn't perfect, hearing him speak in such harsh terms is highly unusual. Instead of feeling in control, Max gave the impression of reacting to the car, constantly correcting, trying to survive lap after lap rather than attacking as he usually does when he has complete confidence in the machine. The root of the problem seemed to lie in the car's aerodynamic window. The RB22 arrived in China with a significant upgrade package focused on the floor, side pods, and rear suspension interaction, a clear attempt to improve airflow efficiency to the diffuser and increase downforce without sacrificing top speed. On paper, the concept made sense, especially on a circuit like Shanghai where long straights combine with sweeping corners that punish any aerodynamic imbalance. However, what happened on track was different. The car displayed bursts of speed, but also extremely sensitive handling to balance changes, alternating between aggressive oversteer and unexpected understeer, making it almost impossible to maintain consistent driving during a long stint. This behavior had a direct consequence that in Formula One is often devastating: tire wear. When the car's balance is unpredictable, the driver is forced to constantly correct the trajectory, apply more steering input than necessary, and manage the throttle very cautiously. All of this punishes the tires, especially on a circuit like Shanghai where long corners put a heavy load on the front tires for several seconds at a time. During Saturday's sprint, and also in Sunday's long runs, the Red Bull began to show much greater degradation than expected, something that Verstappen went so far as to describe as one of the worst tire performances of the entire grid during that weekend. Sunday's race began with a familiar pattern for Red Bull this weekend. Verstappen had another difficult start, losing several positions in the opening meters as he struggled to find traction during the initial acceleration phase. Within a few corners, the world champion had dropped from his starting position to the midfield, running roughly between 14th and 16th. For a driver accustomed to controlling races from the front, this scenario forced a complete change in strategy. Instead of managing the race through pace, Verstappen had to begin a gradual recovery, seeking clear air and avoiding getting caught in DRS trains that would have further exacerbated the tire where that had been a concern for the team since Saturday. As the laps ticked by, Verstappen's talent began to emerge once again. Capitalizing on small mistakes from his rivals and managing overtaking opportunities well, the Red Bull driver gradually began to climb back up the field. Once he managed to clear the thickest traffic, his pace began to stabilize, and the RB22 showed moments of competitiveness, especially in clear air. This phase of the race allowed Max to climb back up to around 6th position, a remarkable recovery considering his difficult start. However, even during this seemingly positive period, radio communications revealed that the car still lacked the necessary confidence, forcing him to constantly manage tire wear and avoid pushing too hard. It was precisely when the race seemed to be entering its more stable final phase that the decisive problem arose. With approximately 10 laps remaining, Verstappen began to notice something strange about the car's power delivery. Exiting turn 6, a key acceleration zone at the Shanghai circuit, the RB22 simply stopped accelerating normally. The power loss was immediate and noticeable. The car abruptly lost speed, and Verstappen himself reported over the radio that something was wrong. For a few seconds, the steering wheel display went dark and the car lost virtually all traction, a clear sign that the problem wasn't just aerodynamic or tire-related, but something connected to the car's internal systems. Initial reports quickly pointed to an electrical fault linked to the power unit. At that point, the only priority became avoiding stopping the car on the track. Verstappen managed to keep the RB22 moving long enough to slowly return to the pit lane, where the team made the decision to retire the car and end his race. It was a bitter end to a weekend that had already been extremely difficult since Friday. Following his retirement in Shanghai, one of the first things that stood out was Max Verstappen's extremely direct tone when analyzing the weekend. It wasn't an emotional or explosive reaction, but something even more revealing, a cold and very clear frustration with the car's current state. Verstappen explained that throughout the Grand Prix, he had the feeling of not being able to truly compete, of managing problems instead of fighting for performance. In his own words, the car didn't allow him to push with confidence at any point, and every attempt to attack ended with the same result, an unpredictable balance that forced him to ease off the pace to avoid further damaging the tires. For a driver who has built his dominance precisely on the ability to push the car to the limit throughout the entire race, this limitation represents one of the most worrying signals he can send within a team. Another point Verstappen made clear in his statements is that this problem didn't suddenly appear in Sunday's race. According to him, the difficulties with the RB22 had been evident since the beginning of the weekend. During qualifying, he described the car as extremely difficult to drive, even stating that he had never had such a challenging car during his time with Red Bull. This type of comment is not often heard within championship-winning teams, as drivers and teams typically tend to protect their projects publicly. However, Verstappen is known for his frankness and for not hiding his feelings when something isn't working. This transparency has a dual effect within the team. On the one hand, it puts pressure on the engineers to react quickly, but on the other, it also makes it clear to the paddock that the world champion is not satisfied with the car's current direction. From Red Bull's side, the discourse has been much more calculated. The team has acknowledged that the RB22 has a very narrow operating window and that the aerodynamic package introduced in China still needs further understanding to function as expected. The engineers pointed out that the objective of the new parts was to improve the efficiency of the aerodynamic flow and stabilize the car's platform under braking and acceleration, but in real race conditions, the handling proved to be much more sensitive than anticipated. Furthermore, the failure that caused Verstappen's retirement points to an electrical problem related to power delivery, something that is still being analyzed to determine whether it is a specific component or a deeper vulnerability within the car's energy system. Verstappen's retirement at the Chinese Grand Prix has implications that go far beyond simply losing points in a single race. In this case, it's not just a temporary lack of pace, but a dangerous combination of factors. A car with a very narrow operating window, clear tire degradation issues, and now also doubts about the reliability of the power unit. When these three elements appear simultaneously, the margin for error is drastically reduced, and each weekend becomes more of a test of technical survival than a battle for pure performance. Another important aspect is the strategic impact on power unit management for the remainder of the championship. The indications of an electrical fault in the RB22's energy system are forcing the team to carefully review all components used so far, because any premature replacement of key engine elements could have direct consequences in the second half of the year. In Formula One, there is a strict limit on the number of components each driver can use during the season, and if Red Bull starts consuming parts ahead of schedule, it could face grid penalties at important circuits on the calendar. This scenario greatly complicates strategic planning for the championship, especially if direct rivals maintain more stable reliability. After a weekend as complicated as the one in China, the first thing Red Bull needs to do is understand with absolute precision what really happened with the RB22. The team leaves Shanghai with a huge amount of data collected during practice, qualifying, the sprint, and the race, and now begins one of the most important processes within any Formula One team, analyzing every parameter of the car to identify the true source of the problem. It's not just about the electrical failure that caused Verstappen's retirement, but something much deeper, understanding why the car behaved so unpredictably throughout the weekend. The engineers in Milton Keynes will have to study the correlation between the simulator, the wind tunnel, and what actually happened on track, because when these three areas stop aligning, the car's development can quickly veer off course in the wrong direction. The second area Red Bull will have to work on is the immediate aerodynamic development of the car. The package introduced in China aimed to improve the RB22 stability and widen its performance window, but the results have shown that the right foundation has not yet been found. This means that in the upcoming races, we could see significant adjustments to the floor, diffuser, and how the rear suspension interacts with the car's aerodynamic platform. These kinds of changes aren't always visible to the casual observer, but in Formula One, they can completely transform a car's behavior. If Red Bull manages to widen that operating window, the car could go from being extremely difficult to drive to once again becoming a competitive machine in a variety of track conditions. Another key aspect in the upcoming races will be the management of the power unit and energy system. The failure that forced Verstappen's retirement has raised concerns within the technical department, because any issues related to the electrical components of the hybrid system can directly impact the engine strategy for the remainder of the championship. The team will have to determine whether the problem was an isolated component or if there is a broader vulnerability within the system. Based on that conclusion, they could introduce modifications or adjustments to the energy management software to prevent a similar power loss from happening again in future races. Looking at the entire weekend together, Max Verstappen's retirement from the Chinese Grand Prix cannot be interpreted simply as an isolated mechanical failure in a complicated race. What happened in Shanghai exposed several weaknesses that have rarely been seen together at Red Bull in recent years. A car with a difficult-to-understand balance, tire degradation that limited pace throughout the race, and finally a power issue that ultimately forced the world champion to retire before the checkered flag. In Formula One, when a dominant team begins to show cracks simultaneously in performance, reliability, and driver confidence, the rest of the paddock immediately interprets it as a sign of vulnerability. It is also clear that the RB22 remains a car with potential, but still far from offering the stability Verstappen needs to fully unleash his talent. The driver himself hinted at this during the weekend when he spoke of the difficulty in pushing the car to the limit and the constant feeling of managing problems rather than racing. That difference is crucial. In his years of dominance, Verstappen could attack every lap knowing the car would respond exactly as he expected. In China, however, the feeling was completely different. An unpredictable car that forced him to slow down, manage his tires, and avoid risks that wouldn't normally be part of his driving style. Now the question remains open for all the fans. Are we just witnessing a temporary setback for Verstappen, or the start of a season far more complicated for Red Bull than many imagined? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.